I'm sitting in the cockpit of my plane right now, 38,000 feet above the earth, and my hands are trembling. Not from fear. I stopped being afraid a long time ago. They're trembling because 20 minutes ago, I received a flight request that made my blood turn to ice water. The names on the manifest, I know those names. I've carried them like scars for 15 years. They need me now. The same people who threw me away like garbage, who left me pregnant and bleeding on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. They need my plane, my skills, my mercy to save someone they love. And the most beautiful part, they have no idea who I am. If you've ever been thrown away by people who thought you'd never rise again, this story is for you. Because sometimes, the universe has a sense of justice so perfect, it takes your breath away. I was 17 when it happened. 17, with calloused hands and dreams I kept locked away in the deepest parts of my heart. I worked as a domestic for a wealthy family in the countryside. One of those sprawling estates where the money is so old it's fossilized, where the help becomes invisible furniture. My days started before sunrise. I would wake at 4:30 in the morning to prepare their breakfast. Fresh orange juice squeezed by hand, eggs from their private chickens, bread baked in their wood-fired oven. By the time they came down at 8, everything had to be perfect. The silverware polished to mirror shine, the newspapers ironed flat, the flowers in the dining room arranged just so. I cleaned their marble floors on my hands and knees, with a brush so small it took hours to cover each room. I served their elaborate dinners in silence, memorizing which fork went with which course, which wine glass was for the white and which for the red. I washed their silk clothes by hand, because the washing machine was too rough for their delicate fabrics, scrubbing gently in lukewarm water until my fingers wrinkled like raisins. The house itself was a monument to their wealth. 14 rooms, each decorated with antiques worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Persian rugs that I wasn't allowed to step on with shoes, crystal vases I had to dust with special cloths, oil paintings of their ancestors staring down with cold, disapproving eyes, as if they could see right through me. They paid me barely enough to survive, but I was grateful. I had nowhere else to go. My own mother had died when I was 14, leaving me with relatives who saw me as a burden. This job, sleeping in their servants' quarters, eating their leftover food, wearing their cast-off clothes, was the closest thing to security I'd ever known. The main house felt like a museum, all crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of dead ancestors staring down at you with cold, judgmental eyes. I slept in a tiny room off the kitchen, smaller than their walk-in closets. The walls were thin, and I could hear everything: their dinner conversations about politics and business deals, their arguments about money and social status, their late-night parties that would leave the house reeking of expensive perfume and cigar smoke. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had 4 walls and a door that locked. I had a small window that looked out over their vegetable garden, and sometimes I would sit there in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, dreaming of a different life. I should have known that lock meant nothing to them. The family consisted of 4 people. The patriarch, a man in his 50s who owned several businesses and treated everyone like his personal property. His wife, who spent her days arranging flowers and gossiping with other wealthy wives. Their adult son, who was maybe 25 and had never worked a day in his life. And their teenage daughter, who largely ignored my existence. The son was the worst. He had this way of looking at me, not like I was a person, but like I was something he owned, something he could use. When his parents weren't watching, he would make comments about my body, my clothes, the way I moved around the house. I learned to avoid him, to disappear into other rooms when I heard his footsteps, to keep my eyes down and my voice quiet. But in a house that size, there's only so much you can hide. It was a Thursday night in October. I remember because the wind was howling through the old windows, and the rain was beating against the glass like angry fists. The family had gone to bed early after hosting some political dinner that left the house reeking of cigars and expensive cologne. I was finishing the dishes when I heard footsteps behind me. I won't tell you everything that happened next. Some stories are too heavy to carry in full detail. But I will tell you this: when someone with power decides to take what isn't theirs, your voice disappears, your body freezes, you become a ghost in your own skin. I didn't scream, I didn't know how. I just stared at the kitchen ceiling and counted the water stains while my childhood died in that cold, marble tomb they called a home. Afterward, he straightened his clothes and walked away like nothing had happened, like I was nothing, less than nothing. Tell anyone, he whispered before disappearing into the shadows of the hallway, and you'll learn what happens to liars in this family. 6 weeks later, I was throwing up every morning, not just sick, violently, desperately sick. My body was changing in ways that terrified me, and I knew exactly what it meant even though I couldn't let myself believe it. I tried to hide it at first. I would wake up earlier to clean up any evidence, splash cold water on my face to hide the pallor, force myself to eat small bites during meals so they wouldn't suspect anything. But morning sickness isn't something you can hide forever, especially when you're living in someone else's house, subject to their constant observation. The woman of the house noticed first. She had this way of watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, cataloging every change in my behavior like she was building a case against me. When I started rushing to the bathroom after breakfast for the third time in a week, I could feel her suspicion growing like a cancer. I spent days working up the courage to tell her. I practiced the words in my tiny room at night, whispering them to my reflection in the cracked mirror above my dresser. I imagined different scenarios. Maybe she would be understanding. Maybe she would help me find a solution. Maybe she would at least listen. But denial only works for so long. I finally gathered the courage to tell her, the woman of the house. I found her in her rose garden on a sunny afternoon, wearing white gloves and cutting flowers for the dining room table. She looked so elegant, so maternal. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would help me. "Ma'am," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the buzzing of the bees. "I need to tell you something about your son." The scissors stopped moving. She looked up at me with eyes like winter frost. I told her everything, the whole truth, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, worse, a dismissive one, the kind of laugh that erases you. "You lying little witch," she said, her voice soft as silk and sharp as a blade. "Do you really think anyone would believe that my son would touch something like you? Something like you?" Those words carved themselves into my soul. Within an hour, they had dragged me to a car. No trial, no questions, no second chances. Just cold, efficient disposal of a problem they didn't want to deal with. The drive felt endless. We went deeper and deeper into the countryside, past the last gas station, past the last road sign, until there was nothing but dirt paths and endless fields stretching toward a horizon that looked like the edge of the world. When the car finally stopped, I was in the middle of nowhere, literally nowhere. Just a dirt road, cutting through farmland, with not a single house in sight. They threw my small bag out of the car, the one with my 3 dresses, my mother's rosary, and the $15 I had saved, and left me there. "If you come back," he said through the rolled-down window, "if you ever mention this family's name, we'll make sure you disappear permanently. Do you understand?" I nodded. What else could I do? The car disappeared in a cloud of dust, and I was alone. 17, pregnant, abandoned, on a dirt road with nothing but the clothes on my back, and a baby growing inside me that I never asked for. I want you to imagine that feeling. The complete, devastating loneliness of being thrown away by the world. The terror of having nowhere to go, and no one to call. If you've ever felt discarded, forgotten, treated like your life didn't matter, leave a comment below, because you're not alone. We survivors, we find each other. I started walking, not because I had a plan, but because standing still felt like giving up. And something inside me, something stubborn and unbreakable, refused to die on that road. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so scared. My feet started bleeding after the first few miles, my stomach cramped with hunger and morning sickness and pure terror. But I kept walking. As darkness fell, I saw a light in the distance. A small house with smoke curling from the chimney. I almost didn't knock. What if they called the police? What if they sent me back? But the cold was seeping through my thin dress, and I was carrying more than just myself now. The woman who answered the door was maybe 60, with weathered hands and kind eyes. She took one look at me, dirty, shivering, obviously pregnant and desperate, and stepped aside without a word. "Come in, child," she said simply. "You look like you've been walking through hell." Her name was Maria, and she became the first angel in my story. She gave me soup and a warm blanket, and she asked no questions that first night. Just let me sleep on her couch and pretend, for a few hours, that the world still had safe places in it. In the morning, over coffee and fresh bread, I told her everything. She listened without judgment, her weathered hands folded in her lap, nodding occasionally like she'd heard stories like mine before. "They'll never look for you here," she said finally. "This village is too small, too forgotten. You can stay as long as you need." For the next few months, I lived in Maria's barn. It sounds terrible, but it wasn't. I cleaned it out thoroughly, swept away years of dust and cobwebs, and made it cozy with colorful blankets Maria gave me and candles I bought with the little money I had saved. I hung curtains across the windows and arranged my few possessions: my mother's rosary, a small mirror, the 3 dresses that were my entire wardrobe, to make it feel like a real home. During the day, I worked in the fields with the other women, picking crops under the blazing sun, hauling buckets of water that left my back aching and my hands blistered, learning that hard work could be healing when you're doing it for yourself instead of for people who hate you. My body grew stronger even as my belly began to show. The women taught me to wrap my stomach with cloth strips, to provide support, to eat certain herbs that would help with nausea, to rest when I needed to without feeling guilty. The women in that village saved me in ways I'm still discovering. They taught me to grow vegetables in soil that seemed impossible to cultivate, to preserve food so it would last through the harsh winter months, to sew clothes that would actually fit my changing body and last longer than the flimsy things I'd worn before. They showed me that strength isn't something you're born with, it's something you build, one small choice at a time, one day of refusing to give up after another. But more than practical skills, they taught me something profound. I wasn't broken. What had happened to me wasn't my fault. I wasn't dirty or worthless or deserving of abandonment. I was just a girl who had been hurt by powerful people. And now I was surrounded by women who understood that survival is an act of rebellion. When my daughter was born, on a cold February morning, with Maria holding my hand and the village women surrounding me with prayers and warm blankets, I realized something profound. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when your world falls apart. I named her Sophia. It means wisdom. And from the moment I held her tiny, perfect body against my chest, I knew I would move mountains to give her the life I never had. For the first few years, we lived simply but with purpose. I worked in the fields during harvest season, my hands learning the rhythm of picking fruit and vegetables, my back growing strong from bending over crops in the early morning hours. During the slower months, I took in sewing and cooking work, spending long evenings by candlelight mending clothes and preparing meals for families in the village. Every peso I earned, I saved. I slept on a thin mattress on the floor so Sophia could have the only real bed in our tiny rented room. I wore the same 3 dresses, over and over, patching holes and replacing buttons until they were more patched than original fabric. I cut my own hair and Sophia's by candlelight, learned to make soap from lye and animal fat, grew herbs on our windowsill to season the simple meals we could afford. But I was learning something those people who abandoned me never expected. I was smart, not book smart. I'd barely finished elementary school before my mother died and I was sent to work, but survival smart, business smart, street smart. I could see opportunities where others saw problems, could imagine solutions that no one else had thought of. The breakthrough came when I realized the women in our village were sitting on a gold mine they didn't even recognize. These women, many of them grandmothers who had been making preserves and pickled vegetables for decades, created products that were absolutely incredible. Jam that tasted like summer captured in a jar, pickled peppers that had the perfect balance of heat and sweetness, tomato sauce that made your eyes roll back in your head with pleasure. But they had no way to sell them beyond the tiny local market that served maybe 300 people on a good day. I started small, really small. I noticed that the women in our village made the most incredible preserves and pickled vegetables, but they had no way to sell them beyond the local market. So I convinced 5 of them to pool their products, and I took a bus to the nearest city every weekend to sell them at the farmers market. Within 6 months, we had standing orders from 3 restaurants. Within a year, I had rented a small commercial kitchen and was employing 12 women from our village and 2 neighboring ones. Within 3 years, I had my own label, Sophia's Kitchen, named after my daughter, who spent her early childhood sleeping in baskets next to prep tables, surrounded by the aroma of onions and spices and women's laughter. The business grew like a living thing. We expanded to catering, then to a small restaurant, then to a chain of 3 restaurants across the region. I learned everything by doing it: how to read contracts, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to manage people and inventory and taxes. But more than that, I learned something that would change everything. I learned to fly. It started practical. As the business expanded, I needed to visit suppliers and potential restaurant locations across the country. Commercial flights were expensive and unreliable to the small cities where we operated. A local pilot offered to teach me in exchange for catering his daughter's wedding. The first time I took the controls of a small plane, something clicked into place that I hadn't even known was missing. Up there, above the clouds, I wasn't the girl who'd been thrown away. I wasn't the scared teenager who'd walked alone down a dirt road. I wasn't even the struggling single mother who counted every peso twice before spending it. I was just me, pure and free, and completely in control. The instructor, a grizzled old pilot named Carlos, who'd been flying for 40 years, said he'd never seen someone take to it so naturally. Most people fight the plane. He told me after my third lesson, they think they have to muscle it around the sky. But you listen to it, you work with it. That's the mark of a real pilot. I got my pilot's license, then my commercial license, then my certification to fly larger aircraft. Every step required hours of study, practice flights, written exams, practical tests. I would stay up late into the night with Sophia sleeping beside me, reading aviation manuals by lamplight, memorizing weather patterns and navigation techniques, and emergency procedures. As Sophia's kitchen continued to grow, I invested in planes. First, a small single-engine Cessna that I used for business trips to visit suppliers and scout new restaurant locations. Then, a twin-engine plane that could carry more passengers and cargo. Then eventually, a small fleet of aircraft that I could charter out to other businesses to help cover maintenance and fuel costs. But the real transformation, the moment that changed everything about who I thought I could be, happened when I started flying medical missions. Our region was remote, with many isolated communities that couldn't be reached by ambulance when emergencies struck. I began volunteering with a medical aid organization, flying doctors and supplies to places the world had forgotten about, the same villages I had worked in during those early years, the same forgotten people who had saved me when I needed saving most. Those flights taught me something beautiful about purpose. Success isn't just about money or recognition. It's about becoming the person who shows up for others the way you needed someone to show up for you. By the time Sophia turned 12, I owned 4 planes, 3 restaurants, a food distribution company, and had just purchased a small airport. I was respected in business circles, known for my charitable work, and most importantly, I was happy. We lived in a beautiful house on a hill overlooking the valley, where I'd once slept in a barn. Sophia was in private school, speaking 3 languages, taking piano lessons, and horseback riding. She was growing up believing she could be anything, do anything, have anything she wanted. Everything those people who abandoned me thought they could deny us forever. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my office at the airport, reviewing flight schedules and maintenance reports, when my operations manager knocked on the door. "Emergency medical evacuation request," she said, handing me a folder. "Family emergency in the capital. They need immediate transport for a critically ill patient, and we're the only charter service with a plane that can make the distance in the time frame they need." I opened the folder casually, scanning the flight details, departure time, destination, medical equipment required, passenger manifest, and then I saw the names. The world stopped spinning. There they were, printed in black ink on white paper like they'd always been, just ordinary words, instead of the names that had haunted my dreams for 15 years, the family that threw me away, the people who left me pregnant and desperate on a dirt road, who told me I was nothing, who said I would never matter to anyone. They needed my plane, my skills, my mercy. The patient was an elderly woman, the matriarch of the family, the same woman who had called me a lying little witch, who had watched her son drag me to that car without saying a word. She was dying, and only I could get her to the hospital in time. My hands started shaking so hard, I had to put the folder down. 15 years of success, of healing, of building a life that mattered, and suddenly I was 17 again, standing in that rose garden, being laughed at and dismissed. "Ma'am," my operations manager asked, "should I confirm the flight?" I stared at those names for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell them exactly who I was, and watch their world crumble the way mine had, to let them feel, for once, what it's like to be powerless and desperate. But that's not who I am anymore. "Confirm the flight," I said quietly, "and tell them Captain Helena will be piloting personally." I spent the next 2 hours preparing for what might be the most important flight of my life. I checked and double-checked every system, every piece of medical equipment, every detail that could mean the difference between life and death. Not because I cared about them, I don't think I'll ever forgive them for what they did, but because someone's life was at stake, and up there in the sky, politics and history and personal grudges don't matter. Only getting people home safely. When they arrived at the airport, I was already in the cockpit, running through pre-flight checks. I watched through the window as they rushed across the tarmac, older now, grayer, but unmistakably them. They boarded quickly, focused entirely on the elderly woman on the stretcher. She was unconscious, hooked up to machines, surrounded by medical equipment and worried family members. I kept my aviator sunglasses on, and my voice professional as I welcomed them aboard. They didn't look at me, didn't really see me. To them, I was just the pilot, just another service provider, just like I'd always been invisible to them. We were airborne within minutes, climbing steadily, toward our cruising altitude. The flight would take 2 hours, 2 hours of being trapped in a metal tube with the people who had tried to destroy me. About 30 minutes into the flight, my co-pilot, a young man named David who'd been with my company for 3 years, turned to me with a question about our approach route. "Command is ready, Captain Helena," he said, using the formal address he always used during flights with passengers. The reaction was immediate. Silence fell over the cabin like a heavy blanket. I could feel them staring at the back of my head, could practically hear their minds working, trying to process what they'd just heard. "Captain Helena?" I turned my head slightly, not enough to face them fully, but enough that they could see my profile, enough that they could start to recognize the face they'd tried so hard to forget. The woman's son, the one who had destroyed my childhood, was the first to understand. I heard his sharp intake of breath, heard him whisper something to his wife that I couldn't make out, but I didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge them, just kept flying, professional and calm and completely in control. For the first time since that night in the kitchen, I held all the power. Their lives, or at least their mother's life, were literally in my hands. I could have done anything, said anything, made them feel the fear and helplessness they'd once made me feel. Instead, I flew that plane like my life depended on it. Smooth, steady, perfect. Because that's who I am now. Someone who shows up, someone who saves people, even when they don't deserve it. We landed at the hospital's medical airstrip with 6 minutes to spare. The ambulance was waiting, and the medical team rushed aboard to transfer the patient. Throughout the chaos of the emergency landing, they never said a word to me, but I could feel them watching, remembering, understanding, maybe for the first time, that the girl they'd thrown away had become someone they never expected. As they wheeled the old woman toward the ambulance, her son stopped at the top of the stairs. For just a moment, he looked back at me. Our eyes met for the first time in 15 years. I saw fear there, and shame, and something that might have been regret. I nodded once, professional, courteous, nothing more. Then I turned back to my instruments and began preparing for the flight home. I never found out if the old woman survived. I never asked, and they never contacted me to say thank you or to explain or to apologize. And that's okay. I don't need their gratitude. I don't need their apologies. I don't need anything from them at all, because the real victory isn't that they needed me, it's that I didn't need them. For 15 years, I carried the weight of what they'd done to me. The shame, the anger, the feeling that somehow I had deserved it. But sitting in that cockpit, watching them realize who I had become, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete and total peace. They thought I was nobody, a disposable girl from nowhere, with no family, no power, no future, someone they could use and throw away without consequences. But I learned to fly. I learned to rise above everything they tried to bury me under. I built a life. I raised a daughter who believes she can conquer the world. I employ hundreds of people, feed thousands more, and I've saved lives with these planes and these skills they never thought I could develop. Most importantly, I learned that revenge isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about becoming so completely yourself, so successful, so whole, so at peace, that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. They threw me away because they thought I was nothing, and in doing so, they set me free to become everything. Sophia is 18 now, getting ready for university. She wants to study international relations and learn to fly, just like her mama. She knows the whole story, not the ugly details, but the important parts. How we came from nothing, how we built something beautiful, how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to your best life. Last week, she asked me if I ever regret not telling them exactly what I thought of them during that flight. No, Mia, I told her. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can say. The truth is, I don't think about them anymore. Not with anger, not with hatred, not even with forgiveness. They're just people who were part of my story for a brief, dark chapter. But my story is so much bigger than that now. I'm Captain Helena. I own the sky. And every time I take off from the airport I built in the valley, where I once walked alone and pregnant and abandoned, I remember something beautiful. They thought they were throwing me away, but they were actually setting me free. If you believe that pain can become power, that survival can become strength, that sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up giving you the greatest gift, your own unbreakable wings, then like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this story, because we all deserve to fly. And sometimes, we have to be thrown away to learn that we were meant to soar all along. The sky is waiting for you. And trust me, the view from up here is beautiful.